Welcome to the Connected Teamwork Podcast by Growth Leaders Network. How do we learn to truly thrive together? How do we stay connected to our authentic selves, each other, and our purpose as a team, especially when challenged? How do we unlock the deeper levels of group intelligence? Enjoy this episode of the Connected Teamwork Podcast and learn practical tools to evolve the connectedness of your team to its next level.
Welcome to the Connected Teamwork Podcast. I'm your host, Olena Sergeyeva, and today's episode is dedicated to team decision-making, a very complicated topic, I think, and very interesting one. Before we dive in, let us just do a brief check-in. How are you feeling and your intention for this podcast? And I'll start. I feel great we're doing this. It's episode 10 already. I also enjoy this wonderful Seattle weather, even though today it's not so wonderful, but the weekend was magnificent. And my intention is to, focus on the challenges and the beauties of team decision making today. With that, I'm in. Over to you, Hilka.
Welcome, Elena, and welcome everyone who's listening. My feeling today is I am feeling present and playful, and my intention for this podcast on decision making is to help ground us in the power of making a choice together and the courage that takes, and also the freedom and other rewards that generates. So with that, I'm in, and I pass it to my friend Carson Hetty.
Very good. Thank you, Hilka. Thank you, Elena. I've always noticed a theme when Hilka's feeling playful, you get a great show. So I'm feeling energized. It's Monday, so I feel like I'm always the best version of myself on Monday, or at least that's what my wife tells me. My intention for today is just to really dive into some of the key learnings that we've had around team decision making. It's such an important superpower to develop. I view team decision making like a puzzle, and you don't have all the pieces. You might have a lot of them, but you don't have all the pieces. Your teammates do. And that's why it's so important to leverage team decision making. So that's my intention for today, is really dive into some of these key learnings that we've all had over the years around the power of team decision making and how you can unlock its potential. So with that, I also am in. And Elena, I'll turn it back to you.
Welcome, Carson. Welcome, Hilka. So let's talk about team decision making. And you sort of started already, Carson, on an important theme. Sometimes you may not have all the pieces to the puzzle. So that's clearly, something you take to the team, and you will be discussing things together to put the puzzle together. But what if, occasionally you may have all pieces to the puzzle and feel like you're in a position to make decisions yourself. So I'm curious, with both of you, what's your experience with scenarios or situations when it's really, really has to be team decision, or the opposite, when it's best for the team and for the organization when the team leader makes the decision. So let's explore that a little bit, and I guess I'll invite Hilke, I'll invite you to start this.
Great, thank you for that. Yeah, decisions are choices. So we make choices every moment, right? Then let's start there. We make decisions every moment. For example, how we relate to our own thoughts and feelings, how we relate to our day, how we relate to a challenge, how we relate to etc. So there's decisions, and from that we can learn that we have a lot of power. I can choose to be grateful for something, or I can choose to complain. I can choose to be curious, or I can gossip and judge, or whatever I want. I have all these choices, of who I want to be. Now, as a leader and as a team, we don't only make choices about mindsets, we also make choices about how we spend time and resources, time and other resources. And being clear about that helps the team a lot to be successful, right? Because it, in effect, creates our reality as a team, what we spend our time and energy on. So, first thing I want to know in terms of decision making when I work with the team is, what are your decision rules? And I like to have 6 scenarios. Is it an I decide scenario? Is it an I decide, we discuss scenario? Is it a we discuss, we decide scenario? And then flip it the other way. Is it you decide, we discuss scenario, or you decide scenario? So these are 5 scenarios, not 6. So knowing that helps to clarify. And I find that that very simple delineation, that very simple distinction with the team helps to create clarity, because where decisions go off the rails is when we don't make them. And we all know a decision not made is still a decision made, because a decision made is to continue with the momentum and not question. And then the other part of that is to wait for others and not take the decision when you need me to make a decision, or not to raise it when it's time to make a question about, do we need to make a decision about this, or to rush by and realize, hey, we have people in the boat that we need to also involve, and that also makes it complicated to make a decision well. So decisions is a very high stakes process that requires a lot of the group intelligence. And often what I find is, before decision, there's this like grown difficulty, sometimes uncertainty. And then once you've made the decision, even if you disagreed with it, there's a relief. So, okay, we are going to India. We're not going to France. Okay, well, I'm going to India then. Great. All right, Carson, what do you think?
So I always have to follow Hilke. So sometimes I feel like Admiral James Stockdale in that old VP debate. Who am I? Why am I here? Because Hilke does such a great job of articulating his summaries. But knowing that I was following Hilke, I wanted to really bring some heat. So, when I think about this, and Elena, you hit on something so important. When you talk about, sometimes we show up and we have a lot of the pieces. Right? We have a lot of pieces of the puzzle, or we may feel that we are 99% of the way down the decision-making tree before we even broach this with the team. And there are challenges. There are distinct challenges in team decision-making. Number one, really delving into, and Hilke hit on this, the time and the effort required for effective communication and coordination, and how to mitigate these challenges, because team decision-making is an investment worth making. Next, examining the concept of, how can we think collectively as a group? If I make a decision autonomously, that is not inclusive, and it's going to alienate some of the people on the team. They're going to feel less involved in the process, and the likelihood and viability of them subscribing to whatever the decision is might diminish, even if it's the right decision. People like to feel included in those decisions. I've thought back, as I was preparing for today, to 8 distinct teams where I've had team decision-making ability, and fostered that culture. And, I think back on those situations, even when if I made autonomous decisions, that was my biggest learning, is that there might've been someone who had an idea. And that actually leads me to my third element here. Some of the dynamics within teams. There may be people that are very outspoken when you address a concept with your team. I may have a team meeting. I may express intent that I want to create a team decision-making environment. But the thing is, sometimes people aren't always going to speak up or speak out in those situations. You may have some people, because there are power dynamics within teams, that will speak up and that may take the bull by the horns. And you want to make sure that you also, when you break out, you encourage people to reach out to you independently, or even in some of your one-to-one discussions. Those can empower and enable some of those people that may not speak up in the team setting to reach out to you one-to-one. And you can also build consensus and influence by having those conversations one-to-one. And that's how you can make sure that everyone's voice is heard. Those things are super important. And that's why even if your inclination might be to go out there and make an autonomous decision, or that the decision is clear, make sure that you're still putting it out there, because that is going to build consensus and ultimately empower and enable people to follow the team's decision.
Thank you, Carson. And you brought quite a few important aspects there, right? One of them is also, how do you navigate through different personal dynamics, right? Someone is outspoken, someone is more shy. Some questions touch upon sensitive areas where you don't necessarily want to talk in a group. You're okay talking one-on-one or something. And I recall one episode in my management career when an important decision had to be made, and as a leader, I was leaning always towards group discussion. So you bring people together, those who are, in the decision-making level, my first line, and we will discuss and we'll find a solution. We'll hear different perspectives and so on. And that particular meeting turned up to be such a nightmare, with people screaming at each other and having a conflict. Not everyone was screaming. Some were just like, "Oh, I don't want to be part of it. I'll just stay silent." Some people got into a very heated conflict because unknowingly I stumbled upon some sensitive points and built tensions already. By putting it into focus. So at some point I had to take charge and just become very, very, let's say, authoritative in the meeting, autocratic, and well, basically end the meeting with saying we're gonna reconvene next. But what I learned from that experience was that there are very important circumstantial nuances. The context is so important that your preferred way of decision making is not necessarily the best way in those particular circumstances. In those circumstances, the better way would be to talk individually to at least a few players in a group and solicit their opinions, attitude, and discover those hidden things I was not aware of, even though I worked with that team for a while prior to having a big meeting. Maybe not even having a big meeting and arriving at a decision in these small discussions. So I'm curious also from your practical experiences, what are some of the critical nuances, let's say, of the context that you should pay attention to while choosing which of those methods mentioned by Hilke, for example, are more appropriate for decision making? So again, I'll invite Hilke to speak.
So yeah, I'd love the emphasis here on being truthful in the moment, right? Because I may go into a meeting thinking this is decision meeting, and then something pops up in the team is like, wait, well, this is there's actually something more important than the decision that needs to be addressed first. So the first question that I ask myself as a facilitator or leader, and I've seen this with my teams or teams that I facilitate or support, is always creating this check-in before the meeting starts. It's like such a simple practice. We do it at the beginning of every podcast, where I just get to know what's going on, right? And I, as a leader, know if there's an urgent or important decision, so I'm going to then pay attention to it. So I was in a team meeting a couple of months ago, and there was something very big going on for somebody in the team. And at the same time, we had to make a decision because we were going to either hire a vendor or not. And this had an important impact on what we're going to do next, right? So I had a meeting with this vendor set up the next day. So we were going to make a decision on this before I talked to this vendor, right? So then the question, the sensitivity that I need to pay attention to is there was some personal dynamic going on. There was information that I needed to get to the surface about the decision. And so the way to do that for me was to spend some time on the personal issue and then saying, okay, now we've dealt with that. Now let's think about what's the choice at hand. Now, I need to watch out for two things. One is forcing a decision too fast, and the other one is indecision, because both of them are not very helpful. And there's a concept called the groan zone. Like, teams are in the groan zone. This is this uncomfortable place where, like, I'm not quite sure what's going to happen. It's like, right? And somebody's going to try to take charge too fast. That's not it. And somebody's going to try to hit the brake forever, so you never make a decision. And it's like finding the place where you're going to now it's enough. Now, how do we know that we have enough? Very simply, we put the issue on the table, ask everybody's perspective, ask if there's anything else that needs to be considered, and then say, hey, 80-20, are we ready to make a decision? All right. And then articulating the choices, and then make the decision. So that's what I think. Elena, so Carson, go ahead.
Yeah, there's a few key themes that jump out to this, and it's really, oftentimes these are my same themes that are important in just teamwork in general, and that's communication, trust, and transparency. And I think Hilke called out something really important, because there's a time by which the decisions have to be made. And if something is relatively immediate, same day type of decision that needs to be made, often there are ways where, I may have a team chat that I can put my question out to the team and solicit very quick feedback. I can do that in a team setting, and then also do that one-to-one, because I find that people will engage more commonly in the one-to-one chats than they will in the team chats for various reasons that we've outlined. The other element is around transparency, and ensuring that the team knows guidance from leadership, some of our governing principles, and these should play a part in the decision-making process. Why the decision is important, what are the variables at play, so that we make sure that collectively we have all of the pieces. And then the other element is that trust piece. I'm very big on establishing that foundation of trust and transparency with the team, so that they understand why these things are important, why they're a part of this decision-making process. And from there, I think that's where you can start to put some of the other elements into play. I think when you have the team decision-making process, as Hilke outlined, you want to make sure that you're clear in determining that that's what this is for. But you can also, in those moments and in the subsequent dialogue that you're going to have with your team as part of the decision-making process, you can appoint people or empower people to have stretch roles, to be the spokesperson. I've formed betterment committees when I've ran large departments, or even in smaller teams, you can have somebody kind of be that spokesperson to go out and I encourage my team often to have these players only calls without me, come together, gel, build that collaboration collectively. But a lot of times those spokespeople or somebody from the team, they can, kind of elect their own spokesperson to give me that feedback. And that helps protect some of the anonymity as well amongst the team, so that they can collectively give me that feedback, and that can help me as we make that decision.
Thank you, Carson. We're going to take a tiny break here.
You are listening to the Connected Teamwork Podcast by Growth Leaders Network. Do you want to learn more about building the next level of connectedness in your team? Please contact Growth Leaders Network on LinkedIn. And now, back to the show.
We just talked about many ways of how leader can enhance the quality of the decision by structuring it in a certain way, by having a process that's clear, transparent, by building trust, and by having challenging roles, stretch roles that the team members could play, and use that as a training playground where you build the skill of the team decision making, because it's not about just the leader, helping the group to make a decision. It's about everyone learning how to work as a group on decision making. One of the issues that I observed in my practice a lot is several group decision makers or one group decision maker, and that has to do with power structure of the group, right? With power, which is often sort of behind the scenes kind of thing, and then you deal with someone who, after they speak, no one else really wants to disagree or put forward their decision, or they take the floor and it's taking a lot of time, some episodes like that. So I'm curious also on your advice, how the leader can enhance truly equal participation, or adequate participation. Does not necessarily have to be equal. So what are your thoughts or examples on that? And maybe for a change, let me ask Carson first.
Well, I usually listen to Hilka to get good ideas. No, I'm kidding. No, I think what's important is that you think about what you can control at each leg of the process. So before you establish the the team decision-making process, you have the ability to do outreach to your team and let them know that this is coming, right? So oftentimes I'll solicit, even going into a team meeting, I'll solicit for feedback. I have 80 people that contribute to our team. And so I may solicit feedback on the agenda going into that team decision-making process, let them know that this is coming, and then pre-publish the agenda. Hey, this is what we're going to talk about. And then I can make sure that I understand maybe some of those power forces that might even exist in the room. Somebody may tip me off to it. I can already start to see who may have strong opinions, and then I can start to formulate how I want to go into this as a leader. Then when you're in the meeting, you're obviously going to set the table, right? You're going to set the foundation for the meeting and why you're there. And you have the capability in those meetings to kind of give a roundtable. If you know someone is going to dominate the discussion, don't go to them first. Start to pull out some of the other folks that are in the meeting that you want to make sure that you hear from and have them speak first. Because ultimately, as the leader, you can control how you're passing the baton. And I think that's exceptionally important, that you kind of govern and orchestrate what transpires. You make sure everyone's voices are heard, but you also make sure that some of those stronger voices may not dominate the discussion. And then lastly, I think it's, what do you do coming out of that session? If there are some voices perhaps that you wanted to hear from, maybe some opinions that you didn't hear, or even, if we didn't do a good enough job in the meeting, perhaps of calling for dissenting opinions, then I think it falls incumbent upon us as leaders to go out and proactively seek out those opinions. And I would suggest even reaching out to some of these team members. Maybe you call them, maybe you message them, maybe you call a meeting, but to reach out to them and say, hey, I didn't hear a lot from you in that session. I just want to make sure you're good with this, or, see what thoughts you have. I know historically you've shared some really great insights that have helped us make decisions as a team. And I just want to make sure that I talk to you before we proceed. Make sure that they feel valued in sharing their opinion. And if they do so, if you do that in the right way, you'll encourage them to give candid and pointed feedback that will be helpful, even if it dissents with what was discussed on the call.
Okay, thank you. Carson and Hilka?
Now I get to follow Carson, and I can say the same. I think you said a lot of very inspiring and clear advice that I find very helpful. The thing that comes up for me is altitude. So if I think about power in decision making, it's because people want to have a certain level of control over what they perceive they need to control. And within an organization, everybody has different spheres of influence and control, just because the roles we have, right? For example, in my organization, my sphere of influence and control has a lot to do with the content of what we produce. Now, how we market the content, or who we talk to, or what our website looks like, these are decisions that are, you could say, downstream from me, even though I still have influence on them. So the first thing that comes to mind when I think about working with power in decision making is to be very clear about what's the level of altitude at which we're making a decision. Like, is the decision going to be about, in our case, are we going to be focusing on connected teamwork journeys or events? That might be like a choice point in terms of service. Now, that's what the decision is going to be. Now, then the next level of decision is, let's say we said it's connected team events. The next decision is going to be, so how do we create the content for that? Who's going to market it? all of these are downstream decisions, you could say. So I always have in my mind a little decision pyramid. The top is what's given. What's given is we are in the business of transformation and connectedness, helping people to connect to their potential. The question on the table today, the focus area question is, what do we focus our efforts on in the next 6 months? Is it events or journeys? I'm going to give you an example. And then downstream later would be, and how we're going to do that, right? So because when people know that, they know like, oh, what's later in this meeting is going to be my full decision or my team's decision. This team is operating in this focus box. This is where I'm a participant, whereas in the later box, I'm going to be a leader. So that is one way in which I like to work with power and using power in appropriate ways. What do you think, Elena?
Thank you, Hilke. Well, I'm thinking also that, power or struggle for power, right? When there is conflict, that's another, big thing that may interfere with good decision making. Often has to do with fear, right? Someone is afraid to, have outcomes that are not desirable, or be accountable for something that you are not really fully understanding or part of, and so on. And so basically addressing that fear, even in a meeting, in a group meeting, or in a meeting one-on-one, may significantly reduce those, struggling tendencies. But we only have like 3 or 4 minutes left. Let's also just briefly touch upon the topic of conflict. Like what if there is a significant conflict around decision making? What are some of the tips that you might have? I'm going to go with Carson again. Carson.
So, I think it's really important to think again about some of the elements that you can control in these settings. If you know that there could be a conceivable conflict, making sure that you're setting up an environment that's conducive to everyone being heard and having the opportunity to share, that's going to be super important. However, I think, as leaders, and if you spend enough time leading teams or just as a part of a team, it's unavoidable. You're going to run into scenarios where conflict happens in the moment. Somebody for a variety of reasons could, or groups of people could become almost overpowering in how they express their opinion. And I think that's why it's important as the leader, unless the leader is also mired in the conflict, somebody in the room has to let the cooler heads prevail. And there's, keeping people focused on the mission. And that's why I think the leader has to make sure that they are focused on the mission, and that this is why there's a team decision-making process. We collectively as a team have to proceed, and, ultimately not everybody's going to agree on all these courses of action. So we have to weigh the sum of the parts. We have to understand from each and every one of you, what is your unique vantage point? And I think that's why even the most adamant person that we want to go in this direction still needs to understand all of the perspectives of everyone else, because collectively, and a lot of times teams are going to win and lose together, win or lose together. And so it's important that we're all rowing in the same direction. And so ultimately, hear all perspectives, understand where conflict might arise in advance where possible, address it in real time when it does happen. And, if the decision can't be made right then and there, I think it's important to say, let's table this element of the decision-making process. I'd like to spend some more time one-to-one, really understanding some of these unique perspectives, and we'll reconvene when the time is right. And that's going to give you as a leader opportunity to spend time with not only the people where they're mired in conflict and understanding the impetus for their passion, but also spending time with some of the people that may not have been heard. What are your thoughts, Hilke?
I love the let's hear from everyone. What I'll add to that is let's hear from everyone what they're really concerned about. So, very simple example. Couple wants to go on vacation. One wants to go to the beach. The other one wants to go to the mountains. They're in conflict. They're never going to go on any vacation. Or we can ask beach person, why do you want to go to the beach? And ask the mountain person, why do you want to go to the mountains? And somewhere along that inquiry, where we go a little from position to underlying interest, we get to this place of, I want to relax in nature, or I want to have a fresh environment, or I want to be refreshed, or whatever it is. And once we know this underlying interest, we can then ask, so how can we address these interests? So maybe we go to a lake, right? Because the person that doesn't want to go to the beach likes the coolness of the mountains. Now if we go to a lake in the mountains, both people might be happy. Whatever that is, right? So that there's a little tool we can use of asking why. Why is this important to you? Olena, back to you.
Thank you, Hilke. We're running out of time, so I'm just gonna ask each of us do a one sentence checkout, so we finish with that. And my checkout is that decisions reduce ambiguity, so they bring clarity and they bring renewed energy to go execute. On one hand, on the other hand, there is also value in ambiguity and uncertainty and conflict, because that brings to surface important elements of the situation that need to be addressed. So I would say, as a leader, I would look for a healthy balance between uncertainty, ambiguity, and fairly good portion of decisions being made. Over to you, Hilke.
Playing on that. To me, deciding to not decide, but decide when, is just as important as to make the decision. Over to you, Carson.
Team decision-making is a very important responsibility and investment of time, and it's worth it. So as a leader or even just a member of a team, think about the unique vantage point that you have, the role that you play, and what can you do to empower and enable everyone that you work with to be heard and to express their vantage point as well.
Thank you, Carson. Thank you, Hilke. And thank you, everyone who's been with us on Connected Teamwork Podcast.
Thank you for listening to the Connected Teamwork Podcast by Growth Leaders Network. Take a moment to reflect on what you learned today that can help build your team. Also, if you like, think about one of your team members and what you appreciate about them. Let them know. Enjoy connecting more deeply to what is great about them. And see you next time at the Connected Teamwork Podcast.